Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So excited to gather today and discuss planning and executing successful capital campaigns. We're going to cover everything from getting started to planning. Sharing key strategies for sustaining sometimes, and that, importance of momentum is what's going to keep things going. So my name is Sandra Davis. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founder and CEO of Donorly, and Donorly works with small and mid-sized nonprofits at moments of growth and change to build their fundraising muscle and use donor research, storytelling, and community building to get that done. We especially love that moment of growth and change in a capital campaign. So I'm really thrilled to draw on the wisdom and knowledge of Barbara Gross, principal at BDG Consulting. And Barbara, tell us a little bit about you and your work.
Sure. Just want to say good afternoon to everyone, and to you, Sandra. It's always wonderful to have a conversation with you. But we're going to be very disciplined because we know sometimes we can go in lots of different directions, and Weston is going to be make sure we are. I am really excited to delve into our discussion today on launching and implementing a capital campaign. And by the results of the signups, this is obviously a very hot topic for hot seat coaching. So I'm excited to talk with you all about it. Our conversation today draws very well on not only my 35 years plus of experience in the development field, where for the first 25 years on the front lines, leading major and principal gift programs, mostly in higher and secondary education. And then for the past almost 11 years now as a consultant, mostly working with smaller mission-driven organizations on their general fundraising strategy and implementation, and their capital campaign strategy and implementation. And that's basically generally in the Boston area where I live, and also in New York City. Going back a bit further, and Sandra, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but my early experience, sort of first decade or so of work, was in the advertising, PR, and marketing world. And I still draw on that all the time, because I think there's a meshing of that. And I think certainly when you're talking about a capital campaign, there's a lot of marketing and sort of thinking about how you are messaging your constituencies. So I don't usually use that. I don't usually include that in my intro, but I thought it was relevant for today.
It's important. You really have to draw on all skills when you're running a campaign and managing a campaign. So I can see where those skills would come in really, really handy. Okay, thanks, Barbara. So let's do a little bit of housekeeping. So the call is being recorded, and we will share the recording later. If you would like to turn on closed captioning, go to settings, accessibility, and that's where you can find the turn on closed captions button. We will be selecting a series of questions from those submitted in advance, and we'll try to spend about 10 minutes or so on each question. So we'll invite you to come off mute, introduce yourself, give us your name, your pronouns, your title, and organization, and state your question. We might have a couple of clarifying questions, and then we'll go ahead and process your question with you. However, if you didn't have time to submit a question in advance, no worries. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Our colleague Weston, who's here with us today, will be monitoring the chat, and she'll also be kind of managing the conversation, and we'll try to work through as many questions as we can. Feel free to put follow-up questions and comments and responses in the chat as well. We'd love for this to be, an involved and lively conversation. The goal is to be educational for all involved, including us, and not just those in the hot seat. So Weston, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Thanks, Sandra. Hi, everyone. While we give folks a moment to drop questions in the chat, I was hoping we could start with a question for you and Barbara about defining what a capital campaign is. Take it away.
Sandra, I'll let you go. You start.
Okay. Well, the traditional, idea of a capital campaign, it's a above and beyond your annual fundraising. So it's a big goal the reason it's called a capital campaign is because traditionally it's been about raising money for capital, so a building or a big project like that. I think people often call other kinds of campaigns a big project campaign or endowment campaign, something like that. They also put that under the umbrella of a capital campaign. But it traditionally has some kind of phases. So it has a planning phase, it has a silent phase where you're asking your board and your lead donors to give. Ideally during that silent phase, you're raising the majority of the money from leadership gifts and gifts from your board. So, ideally in the range of say 75 to 85% of your goal is raised in that silent phase. Then you announce the campaign, announce how much has already been raised against your goal, maybe redefine what your goal is, and you go public. And that's the moment when the press may be involved, when you're sending out a press release, when you are announcing it on your website, announcing it in an event, and then you're doing the fundraising that is across your broad community. It should be, sometimes campaigns last for several years. There are, I'm sure you've all seen big campaigns at hospitals and universities that have a goal of $1 billion or $500 million. So those kinds of campaigns can take a long time. We usually work with smaller organizations that have smaller campaigns, maybe $5 to $25 million. Those can be a lot quicker. And so we do think about momentum a lot when we're thinking about these campaigns because we want to keep everything moving forward. But, it's a journey. I'll pass it over to you, Barbara.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad you kind of outlined, the sort of the structure, because those are sort of the key phases that you identified. One of the things that we talked about in sort of preparing for today's webinar was just to take your reference to a journey, is that both for your internal planning and your setting of your own expectations and setting leadership's expectations, meaning your executive director, your president, your board chair, your board members. Capital campaigns are marathons, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. They're very different, as Sandra alluded to, they're very different than raising annual operating support, money in, money out, money in, money out. They are, these once in a long time endeavors. They are not to be embarked upon sort of, without a roadmap. They need a map. That's what Sandra was sort of outlining. But when you think about what a marathon is, if anybody has done any long distance, whatever, walking, running, swimming, cycling, whatever, it requires taking a long view towards success. It requires planning. It requires patience. It requires a tolerance for the ups and downs. It really requires teamwork and building your strength over time. And I want to emphasize sort of two things. It is the teamwork piece. I'm sure many of you have heard this reference, development is a team sport. Nowhere is development more a team sport than in launching a capital campaign. Yes. And we'll get into some of these other aspects as we talk further today. But I think just kind of calibrating for that, this is long term, whether it's 2 years or 7 years. It's a long-term endeavor and not one to be taken lightly.
That's great. And if I may, Barbara, as you alluded to at our planning call, you talked about some critical questions an organization should ask themselves before embarking on a campaign. Yeah. Could you talk more about that?
Sure. And the questions I'm going to put forward, let me just sort of premise it by saying these are questions that need to be, they need to be approached in a clear-headed, objective manner, trying to get away from conscious, unconscious bias, not conscious bias, unconscious bias, or just trying to sell yourself and your organization into a concept.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for campaign consultants, because this is often where a consultant who is, that outside voice of objectivity can be so beneficial to your planning phase. So the questions that I certainly advise my clients to look at are, number one, what is your why? Why are you doing it? Why, why is this a priority, and why now? And you have to be able to articulate that. Oftentimes that comes out of strategic planning. So this is all what I call, and you'll probably hear me say this more than once today, this is all the work before the work. And in fact, these questions are really the work before the work before the work, if you can sort of follow that that pattern. So why you're doing it? I mean, what is that compelling need, priority, how significant opportunity for growth and change and impact? And then another question to sort of contemplate on this, in the same vein, is knowing who's going to make this possible in terms of their philanthropy. Is this going to be an internal initiative where, board members, if you have that kind of board, the board and, a small group of lead donors are basically going to satisfy the needs of this campaign objective in what I would call raising the most amount of money from the fewest number of people in the shortest period of time. That's an approach. Typically, that's a fortunate place to be in. But a lot of places are not in that place. So knowing who's going to make this possible. And then those two questions, your why and your who, will help inform your when, because you need to have those pieces in place in order to move forward with, as Sandra mentioned, a quiet or silent phase of fundraising for your campaign initiative. And that will also inform your how. How are you going to get this done? Is this something that is going to be board led? Is there someone on the board or elsewhere who can help lead this campaign? And I really hope we get into this topic of leadership, because something you'll hear me say probably more than once, leadership matters. I really cannot say that enough. Leadership, internal leadership, and your board leadership, it matters in getting into a campaign. And what are your staffing? I mean, how are you staffed? Are you staffed in a way that you don't need to add more staff? You've got the positions in place that you need. And if not, how do you begin to work towards having the right people in place and having them sort of come up to speed? Because as we all know, because we're in this field, people do not show up and just start, dialing for dollars. So asking those questions ahead of time, or through actually even revisiting the questions as you move through your campaign journey, can be very beneficial.
Great.
That's so,
Oh, Sandra, do you have something to add too?
I was just going to say, like, I was reflecting on, going back to your first question, the why, and the need to ask that really honestly to yourself, because campaigns really change an organization. Once you've got to the other side and you've built your building, you've done your renovation, you've built out a program, it's going to be a different organization. So you have to make sure you're really behind what is the organization that's going to happen after you're done.
Yeah. Let me just also, I'm going to hit this one pretty hard about leadership. In my frontline career, every campaign I was ever part of always had very strong leadership. In my consulting work, I have seen the alternative. And I have seen a situation, and maybe some of you are in this situation, where you've got one or two board members who are, or maybe one board member who is at the forefront of this, both philanthropically and, you know, in terms of the objective, and he or she is, you know, they're leading kind of what the initiative is going to be. They've, you know, they've really embraced the big idea that has been put forward for this campaign, but the rest of the board is not bought in. And I would strongly advise that there be strong board buy-in. That's part of the leadership that you need to go forward.
You
And
definitely
to
need
do it
every,
well, and to do
yeah.
it well, and to avoid the stalling out.
Yes, you definitely need everybody marching in the same direction. It's really, it takes so much more time to go fetch people and get them marching in the same direction again, and deal with naysayers. It's just, that is one thing that can really stall out a campaign for sure.
This is a great segue into our first question submitted from one of our attendees. I think we have Nicole from Dog Star Rescue on the call. I'd love to invite you to come off mute, and I'll read your question aloud, and I'm sure Sandra and Barbara have some questions about it. So Nicole asked, how can we effectively initiate a capital campaign to engage potential donors and secure initial commitments, setting a strong foundation for success? And personally, Nicole, that last bit was what stood out to me about your question. So Sandra, Barbara, Nicole, the floor is yours.
Curious, Nicole, are you about to start a campaign? Have you started one? Are you in the midst of it?
We already started the private portion of it.
Okay.
So we are basically now moving on to our plea to the community. So some of the hurdles that we've come across is, how do we build relationships and momentum and get that initial donation from local business owners that don't already have a tie to us.
Okay. And can you tell us anything about the amount you are planning to raise and how much you've raised already? If you don't want to talk about that, that's fine. But
no, of course, we
Great.
would love to get 800,000. We purchased a new building that we're renovating. We are at a little over 200 right now.
Okay, great.
How is your board involved? So, I mean, that's, you know, I mean, how are they? Have they all made commitments?
Yep. So the commitments that we're going to receive from the board have already been made. We do not require a certain percentage or monetary donation to be on our board, because we are a 100% volunteer-based organization. Every position is 100% volunteer. So we've already kind of established that. So now it's kind of reaching out to the community.
Well, I would just, you know, again, it's not, you're already off to the races. No pun intended. I'm looking behind you there, but artwork. You're already, you know, the train's already on the track. And, you know, again, you know, as I mentioned before, I mean, you can still ask these questions, again, just for your own peace of mind, for leadership's peace of mind. I think one thing you certainly would want, and maybe you already have this in place, is a gift chart. I mean, how are you going to get there? Sort of what's your roadmap in terms of actual number of gifts you need at which levels, et cetera. I mean, that's kind of what you're aiming towards, and being really transparent with your leadership about that. I mean, certainly my advice would be to sort of, how do you reach out to your business community? I would certainly, if you're not doing it already, really sit down with each board member, look at who's in their network. Remember, your board members are your ambassadors and your advocates. They're among other, you know, your volunteer board, obviously. They are there to, you know, make those introductions, pave the way. Who's in their network? How willing are they to, you know, it sounds like maybe you have your organization is one in which people can come visit, they can volunteer, they can get involved, they can get engaged. And I think the more people are familiar with what you do, the more willing they will be to invest in its future. And it sounds like you're already doing this, so you must have found either you're doing it through debt or some other way of being able to start building this facility, right?
Yes, so we had raised enough money to purchase, and we do have enough money to start everything. It's basically to make sure that we're not blowing through all of our money.
Yeah.
You're going to want to
Um,
have some sort of maintenance fund, you know, for in order to, yeah, I mean, once you build it, you have to maintain it in some way.
Yes.
One thing I would say, Nicole, is, you know, I'm always looking, again, this is about, you know, campaigns take a while. So you have to have these kind of moments of urgency throughout the campaign if you can. So one moment is the moment that you're in the silent phase before you kind of announce that you've gone public. So that might be a moment where you are asking your board members to make their commitment by, you know, a date before the announcement, or that might be a moment where you're saying to leadership donors that, you know, this naming opportunity is available and we'd love for you to consider this so we can put it in the public announcement. So that's some of the kinds of things you can do in that early phase. But now that you're in the public phase, what kind of moments of urgency can you create during the public phase? So you might want to have a special campaign that's specifically about businesses in the local community, and it might be around, you know, a certain level of donation. It might be that you have even like co-chairs in a task force from the business community who are asking other businesses in the area to make a commitment at X level, so that our goal for the business community is to raise a total of X amount by X date. And you can put together a whole campaign around that with some, you know, email messaging. Maybe there's even a matching gift or something like that. Matching gifts are a great way to create a little mini moment of urgency too. So if you want to, for example, ask all your volunteers to give, and you have a match up to, you know, $50,000 for all of the volunteers, and it is bound by the amount and it's bound by a date. So with matching campaigns, you always need an end date, and you need to, you know, I always like to say, like, I know I want to declare victory. I want to know I'm going to succeed, but I also want it to be a stretch. But it needs to be time bound. So people are, you know, people are love a deadline or hate a deadline or both, but they're really motivated by a deadline. And you know that's true because December as a giving season is where almost, you know, a big chunk of people give because of that deadline. And I would say that the more also that you can just raise awareness, I think I'm just reiterating what Barbara said, like, I feel like for dog rescue, people feel very strongly about this. If they have ever rescued a dog, I mean, I don't know how many people on this call have, but I have a rescue dog. I love this dog dearly. I would support, you know, organizations that do this work. And so there's a real like heartstrings thing that you can really tap into, maybe not even, maybe going beyond the folks who are in your known community. And that's where maybe the business owners could come in, and maybe you can get people to tell their stories of their rescue dogs and use that as content to push out to the rest of the community. But again, really think about a time-bound ask and little kind of mini campaigns throughout to keep the momentum going. Hope that's helpful.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Barbara and Sandra. I think that was great. Now, as a reminder to everyone, if you have a question about getting started with a campaign, keeping momentum up, avoiding stalling, feel free to drop it in the chat and we can bring you off mute to talk it through with Barbara and Sandra. And as we wait for a few more, I know you, as you both said, you've had your fair share of experience with campaigns at all phases and stages. So how do you like to keep the momentum going in the marathon of a capital campaign?
Well, you know, one of the things we were talking about just before we got on, and it kind of occurred to me in preparation for today, is the tactics that Sandra suggested about a match, about messaging, about freshening the message, you know, all of that. You know, this is part of the ups and downs of a campaign. But one of the things you know, and because we live in changing times, is there often are forces beyond your control when you're in the middle of a campaign, and like a pandemic, or one of the ones that always comes back to me very strongly at the time was the Great Recession. And you're in the middle of a campaign, and what do you do? You know, there's instinct to kind of pull back. But you know, there again, you know, you can have the best laid plans and they can become derailed, as we know. And this requires, you know, a pivot on leadership, on messaging, on what your donors, what they're thinking, how they're sort of navigating their lives. But I think one of the lessons, and I would just pass this along because there will be other, you know, other sort of national crises that we will confront. And maybe some of your organizations are in the middle of that right now. I mean, I think about some of the people who checked in when we first started. I would say the worst, I want to say the best thing, but the worst thing you could do is go hide under a rock. The best thing you can do is keep communicating. Make sure that people know that you are there. Your campaign hasn't gone away. It may require some different shift. It may, maybe you're thinking, I want this campaign to end in 18 months to 2 years. Maybe the campaign takes 3 to 4 years. But if you've answered your why, then those priorities are still priorities. They may have to be tweaked a bit. But I just wanted to mention that, you know, the things that we can't control can often throw a wrench in the momentum. And it doesn't mean it's the end of the world for a campaign.
It's so true. I think every campaign I've worked on has probably had one of those moments, because that's just the way the world works, and that's the way organizations work. Maybe it's a leadership change at the top of the organization, or you know, something outside of your control as well. So people always, you know, it reminds me that people always ask, like, when is the best time to start a campaign? And, you know, now is usually the answer, because these are long-term things and you really can't game them out in any way. So if you're ready to go, you feel everybody's aligned, you know, you feel like your leadership is excited about it, and you have leadership who is willing to talk about and promote and be an ambassador for the vision, just go for it, and get started. And the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking, Barbara, so we have a client that just announced their public phase of their campaign last night with a really, really great event. And one of the board members came up to me. They're doing really well against their campaign. They're, you know, 80%, 84% of the way there. And one of the board members came up to me last night and said, I did not believe you could do this, but I'm really thrilled that you did. So I think that that's just worth acknowledging at the beginning of early phases of the campaign. You almost have to be a little bit, you certainly have to be optimistic, but you almost have to be a little bit delusional about what you can accomplish, because it should be a big goal. And it often is the first time organizations have ever raised that amount of money for that kind of big project. And it does require, this gets back to leadership, Barbara, it does require vision. It requires board members and leaders who are willing to kind of talk about the outcome, talk about what comes in the future once you achieve your goal. And it does require, you know, a bit of, you know, glass half full. Is that right? Glass half full, not glass half empty kind of thinking. That's the way to keep moving forward.
Forgive me.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons learned from the pandemic was to stay out there, to stay visible, to stay present in your campaign. And we all learned how to do it differently, and how to engage with donors virtually. And it definitely changed our work. There's no question about it. But I think the organizations, the institutions that continue their campaigns, met with success. I think that has been the overwhelming result.
Yes, agree. Yeah.
I just before you were speaking, I was tuned into the chat reading a message that just came in for Barbara, mentioning that that there is an alternative to strong leadership as a key factor to a successful campaign. Could you say a little bit more about maybe the alternative? Like, what does that mean? What is?
Oh,
Let's talk
God.
about that more.
Okay. Yeah, let me explain that. The alternative is not having strong leadership. And
Right.
no, there's no alternative, to be honest. The alternative is you pause until you sort of, I mean, that's certainly what having seen the alternative. I'm sorry, I tend to use that reference. Sometimes it's confusing. My bad on that one. The alternative is as Sandra said, you want to have everybody in that boat rowing in the same direction. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's making their ultimate gift. Maybe they can't, but they can always do something. They can make introductions. They can host gatherings at their home or their office or their wherever they are, their place of employment. They can be involved in thanking donors. Board members, they are your soldiers in the field, in addition to state professionals. And so there isn't really an alternative to strong leadership except to, nurture it, work towards creating a culture of philanthropy so that really everybody in your organization and everybody on your board understands the big idea and the growth and the opportunity that a campaign will provide. And then I certainly would highly recommend that there be a campaign chair or co-chairs. And again, it doesn't always have to be the top donor, but it has to be somebody who is willing and comfortable to be in that role of cultivating and potentially soliciting others.
It's a really important role. I've seen that, held by board members, but also by, stakeholders who are involved in other ways. But it always is somebody who is optimistic, somebody who is out there talking about it, happy to speak at an event, happy to get out into the community, happy to take a call from the local press, whatever it is. It really does need to be somebody who is behind and enthusiastic about the vision.
I hope that for the person who asked, I hope that clarifies what I meant by the alternative.
Thank you both. So this is my last call for if anybody here has a question for Barbara and Sandra for the chat. As we wait for some to come in, I have a couple prepared from some donor lead team members that we have faced that I'd like to ask you both. The first one being, how do you recommend promoting your capital campaign and annual fundraising simultaneously without getting too focused on one? So how do you balance the two? And I think that's important for keeping the momentum up because you don't want one to drop or overshadow the other. So how do you keep them both going?
I'll start.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So again, I would sort of put this in the category of the work before the work before the work. And this I think sort of illustrates the journey that a capital campaign and why you don't do it all that often, because it really builds on the relationships that you have with your donors even prior to announcing a campaign or getting into a campaign. And it begins with really knowing what makes your donors or a donor tick. What do they care about? And to what extent are they invested in and passionate about your mission and your and potentially your campaign objective? One of the things we didn't talk about specifically, and it's sort of a whole other category, is the pre-campaign planning phase, which often involves a feasibility study, as they're referred to, or a pre-campaign study. And that's where, you you're continuing to nurture and cultivate that relationship with your lead donors or with any donor who you want to be part of this initiative. But getting to know your donor or your donors is, again, something that takes time. It takes time over a long period of time as you engage people, in your campaign objective. I think the other thing is, I think the question came up about I think we're going to get to this later about what happens if you approach somebody and they don't support you at the level you expect. So I'm going to just pause there in terms of promoting the campaign, understanding how people get engaged in it. And the only other point I would make is that in some campaigns, there is, which are referred to as comprehensive campaigns, they do include annual support. And in some cases, that's the way, in terms of participation, the vast majority of donors to your campaign will participate. They're not going to, they don't have the capacity necessarily to really move the needle with a, significant 6 or even 7-figure gift. But what they do have the capacity to do is to stretch a bit on their annual commitment. And the approach then is, would you be willing to make that commitment over a 3 to 5 year period, so that you're locking in a slightly higher annual amount. So you're having both a campaign and an annual conversation at the same time. And what that serves to do is, after they've been giving at that level for, let's say, 3 years, it tends to raise their level post-campaign. And so you've sort of accomplished the same thing. They feel like they've invested more in the organization, they're more engaged, et cetera, and they've also been part of your campaign. And, if you map a donor's journey within, it's very interesting to see, even where your lead donors, how long it has taken over, sometimes 5, 10, 20 years for them to start with their first $100 gift to maybe $1 million gift. And Sandra, any of us who have been in this field know that it happens all the time, but it takes time.
Yeah, that phenomenon of having a donor come out of finishing paying off their pledge to the campaign and then increasing their annual giving is very common. And it's one of the benefits of a campaign that people don't necessarily think about when they're embarking on it. One thing I'd like to talk about in terms of this question of layering the campaign asks on annual giving expectations is, I kind of think about a campaign in terms of the vision or the philosophy. So that's, Barbara was talking about the why earlier, and then the strategy to get there, and then all the little tactics. So the tactics like a matching gift and, engaging your business owners, local business owners in a goal. Those are all the tactics. But I think this is where the strategy comes in. So as you are thinking about what the year looks like and you're planning your annual fundraising, you'll want to think about where you're layering on your capital campaign fundraising. So at the beginning, you're really only talking to a few people. You're talking to your board. You're talking to individuals who might give a leadership gift. So that is a little bit easier to layer that on top of your annual giving. And you want to make sure each time you have those conversations that you're mentioning that we hope you'll continue your annual giving at X level. And in addition, make this gift. Oftentimes when you're talking to folks in those early stages, they're very sophisticated philanthropists. This is something that they would absolutely expect to be doing when they're making a gift to a campaign. They understand that the organization still has its day-to-day operations and day-to-day programs that it needs to continue to fulfill on for the community. So being really clear about those expectations when you're making your request, and communicating and being transparent about that throughout. It's an easy case to make that you want to continue doing your mission that you're currently doing at the level you're currently doing it, in addition to this next big project, which is going to, ideally kind of catapult the organization to the next level after it's done. And I would say, as you're thinking about when you get into the kind of public phase and you're thinking about communicating across your entire community, once you've announced the campaign, then even when you're asking for annual donations, you might also want to put in some regular messaging around the campaign. So at the end of calendar year, for example, you might be asking for a renewal of their annual gift that they normally give in November and December, and a secondary ask might be an ask towards the campaign. You might want to do things the other way around, depending on what the capacity of folks are. But for your broader community, you might be expecting that, they'll give a smaller gift, or, you might want to do something like, let's say for a theater company, it might be a seat campaign. So try to arrange that seat campaign during a time that you're not doing a lot of other fundraising. It's away from your gala, it's away from your end of calendar year. And then you can keep it kind of quietly running in the background, but you can make a lot of, focus a lot of attention on it during a time that's quieter fundraising wise. And then you can get people's attention on something like that.
The other thing I would add, Sandra, and you're sort of touching on this as well, is the ongoing communication that you need to have. I saw something years ago and I just thought it was such a brilliant phrase, and it's very simple. Communication is the ask. So
Like that.
even in those quiet times that you're referring to, I mean, they are ideal for finding opportunities for touch points that have nothing to do really with asking for money. But what you're doing is you're continuing to make your organization relevant and present. And of course, nonprofits always get blamed for, whenever you contact me, you're always asking me for money. But we know that that's not true. And I think that it begins with, and Sandra, I think you were sort of suggesting this, in addition to your annual development plan or your campaign plan, and maybe this is where the marketing PR part of my brain kicks in, there should be an annual communications plan. And so how is all of that being integrated? And, and then you can pull pieces out. I mean, we think that people pay attention. I mean, we know how many times people need to see a message in order to really understand it and really sort of digest it. And I think there are just so many opportunities throughout a year where you can message in a way that, something that's special, whatever your, a special event or a special performance or a special exhibition, or if it's student related, something that your students, your kids are doing, there are all kinds of ways to make sure that your donors know that you are active and that their investment in your organization is being put to good use.
It's so good. I mean, it all gets down to relationship building and community building. In the end, that's what this is all about. It's all about relationships. And that I love that your advertising mind kicked in there. Because that communication is so important. And you may not, it may not feel like a two-way communication, but when it comes time to make an ask,
exactly,
hopefully they won't feel that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't know if Nicole is still on here, but from the Dog Star
Rescue.
Yeah. Oh, hi. I don't see your picture up there. But I mean, that's all part of it. And I think these are all elements that, you need, those are the dots that should be connected as you're working towards building support through your corporate business community.
And, it's a challenge to layer a campaign on top of your regular annual fundraising. I don't want to diminish that, but it is, it can be done.
And so with that, no, you had an and.
Without, diminishing your annual fundraising success, because that's going to be really, really important that you keep that up, and it can be done.
We have just about we have a little bit of time left, so I have one final question for you both, and Barbara teased it a little. And so I think a challenge staying motivated is, not everyone will make a gift at the desired amount that we've planned for or that we were hoping for them to give. So how, I want to frame this, we've talked a lot about leadership. How do you recommend keeping leadership motivated towards making the next ask? Because you don't want to get this no or less than, and then say, well, we're going to do this next one. How do we keep everything going and moving smoothly?
Whoa.
You both laugh.
We're all
we
humans.
work with humans. We work with humans, not widgets. So let's start with that, unpredictable humans. And I know that, again, it goes back to communicating, communicate, leadership, relationships. And again, it's about how you're setting expectations, sometimes in a very practical way. You've invested, somebody's really, you feel they're invested with you, engaged with you, et cetera, and they don't make a commitment at the level you want. Is how do you position that? How do you message that to your leadership that, sometimes people make an initial gift, then they make another gift at the end. I mean, there are all kinds of, for every individual, there's an individual way of, of making a commitment like this. Teamwork, making, again, educating your board, and your leadership about what to expect. So, to minimize the number of surprises. I'm going to cede the floor to you in just a moment, Sandra, but I do want to make one point about communication, about communicating early and often. When back in the old days, when I used to have, an office in a, an actual virtual, an actual physical office in an institutional organization I worked, I had something up on my bulletin board that said, loose lips sink gifts. So we do want to motivate our leadership, but we don't want to get ahead of the commitments that might be under discussion. And remember that as development professionals, we are bound to some extent ethically to be discreet and to respect anonymity where that has been requested by the donor. And, anonymity is its own conversation about what that really means. But I have seen situations where the development team or the executive director is so excited and wants to kind of, energize their leadership that they get out ahead of things. And that does not, it can be problematic. It can come back to bite you. So again, I would just remember the role that you play, and you're always representing your organization and institution. You are not necessarily the advocate for the donor, but do remember that we are entrusted sometimes with very very personal decisions, and we should respect that in communicating it to our leadership.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, these are really big personal decisions, and they're emotional decisions. And there's a lot of reasons why people give to a large campaign. So many reasons. But I think it's disappointing when you have an unsuccessful solicitation. And it's really disappointing when you feel like it was going to go one way and it went another way. And, I think people have to process that. And I would also say that no can sometimes mean not now, or no can sometimes, mean maybe. Obviously, you don't want to badger people if they've told you no, but you do want to try to get at the root of their answer if you can, if they're willing to talk with you about that. But I also think that it's the name of the game with campaigns. You're going to be asking people for support, and you're going to get no's, or you're going to get a disappointing result. That's part of the process. And that's why ideally you have a prospect base that is much larger than the amount of people you need. You're trying to identify the prospect base is much larger than the amount of people you need to succeed with the campaign, because you're not going to get a yes every time. So, it's, I think what you said at the beginning, we're humans, we're dealing with humans, and it's, these are challenging conversations for some people. They're big conversations, they're important decisions. And, to me, this is kind of what makes campaigns really exciting too. It's what you're really testing the limits of your organization. You're testing your limits in terms of what you're brave enough to do, what conversations you are able to have, and you're building your comfort level around these kinds of conversations as well, which is really exciting, because that's another outcome of a campaign, besides what we talked about earlier, that your donors will come in with larger annual gifts. What you and your board and your leadership will come out with is a deeper understanding of how to have these kinds of conversations. I've been, had so much fun working with some clients where we have, talked about making the biggest acts they've ever made for their organization. And it's so fun to, when it goes right, to talk with them afterwards and just feel like they have built a new muscle. They did not believe that $10 million or $5 million or $1 million was a level of money they could ask for and have that conversation about. They went and did it. And whatever the outcome, they came back so excited about having done it and challenged themselves to have that conversation. So that's another outcome of campaigns. You build the muscle around these kinds of conversations.
I think that's a great point. And I think, again, everybody wants to come out successful. And I think as you're engaging your volunteers, your board, in their cultivation and solicitation, if at all possible, you want to start people off. We all feel this way. We want to start off with some softballs, with some low-hanging fruit, that are going to just to begin to exercise that muscle, before we start adding the heavyweights to their process. But again, I think here's where a pre-campaign planning study can really be helpful, because you're building that confidence in your board by helping them understand, where maybe some of the landmines are, where some of the weak points are. And in some cases, you go into it knowing that there are some squishy parts that are going to have to be sort of firmed up or identified or clarified or whatever it is over time. That's why these are marathons. And I think, setting that expectation in terms of timing is really important, and having your advocates in leadership so that you have board members who are your partners, I think in this endeavor, really helps. First of all, it makes the losses a little bit easier to tolerate, and it makes the wins so much more joyous and so much more gratifying.
I think that's a great way to land.
Yes.
And it's about 1:55 on Eastern. I know we all have busy Fridays. I think you both just gave some great final takeaways for anyone planning or in the middle of a campaign. So with that, I want to say thank you from me, and I'm going to pass it to Sandra for some last comments and updates.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to follow up with an email, and we'll have that include the session recording and information about our upcoming March session. So you'll see that, I think, early next week. Let's end by sharing some details on ways to connect with me and Barbara. So you can find me and Donorly on social @_Donorly on all the platforms. And on LinkedIn, we'll put that in the chat, and we'll include it in the email as well. And Barbara, let us know where the best places for people to connect with you are.
Yes, you can reach me by email at Barbara at bdgconsulting.com. And I'll just tell you a funny story. When I was first launching my consulting firm, a friend of mine thought it was BEG Consulting. And I said that would be a heck of a name for a fundraising consultant. No,
Not a good
it's
one.
not BEG Consulting. It's bdgconsulting.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and which I mean, it's
We'll
whatever.
send it.
I'm on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, so
Yeah.
do find
Yes.
me there as well. And I would welcome future conversations, and in your capital campaign journeys.
Okay. Oh, this hour flew by. Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you
My pleasure.
for such a great conversation. Like I said, we'll send the email. Our next hot seat coaching session is with Brenna Thomas and Tom O'Connor from the Tom O'Connor Consulting Group. We're really excited about our topic around hiring during a capital campaign. So that will be Friday, March 28th. We'll send that also in an email. Thank you, thank you, thank you all for being here. I love these sessions. It's always such fun, and appreciate your questions, and hope you have a great Friday.